Hello there, I'm your host Des, and this is episode number 189 of the Wellness Project. And on today's episode, I am speaking with Courtney Moore about psychedelic assisted therapy, and more specifically, ketamine assisted therapy. Now, I'm really looking forward to hearing this conversation because this is something I know nothing about, little to nothing about. When I lived in Colorado, I would always go to these monthly therapist mental health meetups, and so many of my colleagues were getting trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. When I learned this, I was really interested. I was very curious about it, but in all honesty, I never looked into it. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Courtney shares how her experience, she had a single session of ketamine assisted therapy, and how this was so profound for her. She shares how this impacted her, the experience of actually being there for hours, going through this treatment, the treatment process, who psychedelic therapy may be right for and who it may not be right for. And she just shares about psychedelic assisted therapy. So it's very informative, very educational, and I learned a lot, so I think you will too. If you are somebody that struggles with your mental health and you've tried all the things, you've tried all these different modalities of therapy, you've tried all these different medications, you've tried the yoga, all of these different things, and nothing seems to be working for you, this may be a conversation that you want to listen to. This may be something that you want to consider. And Courtney says this beautifully during our conversation, that there is something out there for you. Do not give up. New mental health treatments are coming out all the time. There will be something that helps you and supports you. And this is just another option to consider. I hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you learn a lot. Help me welcome Courtney. Courtney, thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, so excited to chat with you about this.
I am very excited. So, before we get into talking about your experience with ketamine therapy, I would love if you can go back, take some time to share your story with us, share your mental health journey with us.
Absolutely. Obviously, that's a big question. So I'll try to give you the broad strokes, but feel free to corral me or direct me if something would be more useful. I had a pretty tough childhood. I think I can say that sort of objectively. My mother died when I was one. My father raised me. I'm pretty sure he was autistic. He had a lot of trouble keeping a job. So we moved twice a year. I moved houses twice a year, every year of my life until I was 15. He was not always very nice to me. I ran away from home when I was 15, and I ended up in a girls' Catholic boarding school, which was actually incredible, very healing for me. And then a women's college, and running away and going to boarding school really started my healing journey. At my first high school, I had to do mandatory therapy when I ran away. At my second high school, I had terrible eating disorders and I had to do mandatory therapy when the administration found out. In college, I had to do mandatory therapy. And by then I was hooked. By then I was like, therapy's awesome. So I've been doing therapy, on and off for 25 years now. And I'm so grateful for it. I really needed it in my teen years and 20s. I grappled with a lot of self-hatred, depression. I've been doing a lot of research recently. I work in wellness now. I'm an acupuncturist and I do intuitive counseling. And I've been doing a lot of research on trauma and the nervous system, and really recognizing that I think for much of my life, I was stuck in a functional freeze. I think I didn't have access to a lot of parts of me, and that was driving a lot of the disordered eating behavior and a lot of just this like existential melancholy. I think I was born into a lot of sadness. My mom knew she had cancer when I was in her belly. And my dad was just devastated to lose her. I was only one when she died. So I just think there was so much sadness around me. And that was sort of the tone of existence for me. It was just like, life is sad. Life is very, very sad. I thought about antidepressants. I never took antidepressants. I considered it. I was certainly suicidal at a couple points in my life, had full-on interventions at some points when I had plans. I loved therapy, but in some ways it reaffirmed for me that like life is really sad. In fact, I remember that therapist who worked with me in college, she was my first therapist in college, was like a social worker trainee. And after our second session, she put her clipboard down. She'd been taking all these notes and she looked me in the eye and she said, I just feel like I'm really resonating with a lot of what you're saying right now. And I thought, great, maybe I should have the clipboard, you know. But I do think a lot of my depression was this honest assessment of life as a difficult place. I lived with that for a long time. And I was very high functioning. I'm a very successful person. So I figured out how to live with it. I was working as an acupuncturist in my, gosh, I must have been in my early 30s at this point. I had considered a lot of other options. I'd considered I was really curious about psychedelics at that point. And I live in San Francisco. It's very trendy here. There's a lot of people doing psychedelic therapy in San Francisco. And I had been super kind of like straight laced up until that point, and I wanted a guided experience of some kind. And that's when I started sort of exploring assisted therapy options that are available here in San Francisco.
Okay, a lot there, a
A
lot
lot.
of
Yeah.
trauma and sadness growing up. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and sharing your
Yeah.
story. And I'm just wondering, with your depression and just growing up in that kind of environment of sadness, were there any particular symptoms of depression that you were experiencing?
It was definitely a lot of low self-esteem. There were times that I felt low energy, low motivation. Life is pointless. Why should we try? I wish I didn't have to be alive. This is all just pointless. Like life just felt really pointless to me. You know, I learned the Enneagram in my mid 30s. I really love the Enneagram. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. And that made a lot of my experience make more sense because everything I'm describing is kind of classic 4. And I always felt like such an outsider. I always just felt like everyone else knew how to live life. And somehow that they skipped over me when they were handing out the manuals. And I was just deficient as a human being. So this sense of like pointlessness and also I'm really bad at this.
And so, did you realize that you were experiencing depression or had depressive symptoms, or you just thought, this is how I am, this is how life is?
Once I started doing therapy, I think all of my therapists offered to get me on track for medication. And so it was suggested to me at many points that that was something I should consider. I think, well, I know I actually wrote my college thesis on depression. I was a philosophy major, and I wrote it kind of against the psychiatry discipline that codifies symptoms of behaviors as diagnoses. Because I really saw what I was experiencing as sort of the human condition, sort of this existential query into where we find meaning, how we contribute, where's the purpose of our lives. And so for me, there was this very fine line between what you might call a clinical depression and this sort of like existential lifetime grief from losing a mother. You know, that's real. You know, I think both were happening. I think I was depressed, and also I think I just had this very deep, very real sadness about the human condition that I was grappling with.
No, absolutely. That makes so much sense. I mean, you were born into grief. So everything you were experiencing made total sense. And none of us grow up knowing how to handle anything that life throws at us, unfortunately. And we deal with it in different ways that are not so healthy all the time.
Right. We cope. Yeah.
Yeah, we just cope. And sounds like that's what you were doing was just coping. So
Yeah.
you had, it sounds like, a difficult relationship with your dad. You
Hmm.
ran away when you were 15. So growing
Hmm.
up before that point of running away, were any loved ones, your dad, teachers, any adults in your life, was anyone aware or realizing that you were really struggling?
My dad, I don't think had the capacity to really emotionally attune to me that way. He was very uncomfortable with emotions. When I would cry, he was very mean to me. He'd call me a crybaby and told me he wanted a boy and yell things, throw things. He was just sort of awful. Whatever was happening to me emotionally was off the table in our relationship, my primary relationship there. I had a teacher in fourth grade who was very concerned about me. And I did really well in fourth grade. In fact, she wanted me to skip the fifth grade because academically I was doing very well. But she noticed my affect. She really noticed that my mood was down. And she brought it up to my dad. But again, I just don't think he had the tools, the capacity, the wherewithal to really process that information. I think he told me he thought that must have been after we had a big fight that I was upset, and that's why she was noticing that. I just don't think there was anyone consistently in my life who had the resources to recognize that and decide a path forward. And again, I was just so successful. I was the top of my class. I was the class president, the lead in the school play. I was very functional on the surface, very, very functional. And I think in a way that was one of my ways of coping. Being an achiever was one of the ways I was trying to make sense of life. And then I would just go home and feel really empty despite all the achievement.
Busyness and overachieving are absolutely a coping strategy. Those are the kids that fall through the cracks.
Yes. Yeah. That even now as adults, they say check on your friends who seem like they're doing well. I think I still probably fit into that category. It looks like I have my stuff together, but I don't know. The people who have their stuff together, they can still really be struggling internally. We make a lot of assumptions based on accomplishment.
That is
Yeah.
so, so true, unfortunately, right? That
Yeah.
we achieve, so we're doing great. Everything's
Hmm.
everything's well, but even look at people that have seem to have it all, like celebrities, right? We see unfortunate things, right, with their
Yeah.
mental health and things like that. So it sounds like most of your way of coping was this, joining things, leadership, overachieving. That is in itself a coping strategy. But at what point did you realize then what led to your consideration of the ketamine treatment?
I wasn't specifically seeking it out as a solution to my depression. I was in my 30s. I was curious about the psychedelic assisted therapy. I knew nothing about the options that were out there. I knew nothing about drugs, really. I'd taken mushrooms a couple times, and honestly, my brain is such a fortress of control. I felt nothing because I think I was really unwilling to go there in any capacity. So this is kind of how naive I was. I wanted a therapist assisted LSD experience. I want to take acid with a therapist. This is not a thing. It's not a thing because acid lasts for about 12 hours and no therapist is going to spend a whole day with you while you're tripping. But in my mind, for some reason, I was like, yeah, that would be a good thing to do. That'd be interesting. And then the clinic where I worked rented space to a physician and therapist who were doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And they offered the whole staff a massive discount so that we could try the experience and then refer patients to them. And so it just kind of fell in my lap. I was like, oh wow, here's the like assisted therapeutic drug experience I've been looking for. I did a little research about it and I was like, oh, I have struggled with depression. This seems like this might be a good tool for me. It wasn't something I sought out as like the next line of treatment or a solution to this. And what's interesting, I know we're going to get into more details, but just as highlights, I'll tell you, I asked them on the outset, will this bring up traumatic experiences? And they said, absolutely not. That's not what this particular substance does. Newsflash, it totally does and did. I did the experience, which we can talk about more. I went home. They told me to integrate it. For about 2 weeks, I was really focusing on what I had been through. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then I was like, oh, yeah, it was a thing I did. And 6 months later, a friend from high school came to visit me. And halfway through dinner, she said, dude, what happened to you? You have changed so much. You don't seem depressed anymore. And I was like, I think the ketamine worked. I think that must have done something after all. And I do think it really did. I think there has been a lightness in my being, honestly, ever since that one-off experience, even though I know a lot of people do it in a series of treatments. I just did a single intramuscular dose or session. It was 2 doses. And yeah, it did really lift some of the cloud that had hung over me for so much of my life. And that cloud is really this sense of hopelessness and the senselessness of life and why go on and why try anything, why apply myself, why want anything, because, we're all just going to die in the end. I think that was a lot of the source of my depression. It's like, well, we're all going to die and it could happen sooner than you expect. So why try for anything? And that lifted. That was a real gift.
Wow, this is very interesting because I don't know anybody that's done the ketamine treatment, but I know a lot of therapists, just being a therapist, being in the mental health field, a lot of therapists are getting trained in this because there's so many studies showing such promise for depression with this. So, yeah, if you could walk us through the treatment, what it looked like, your experience? I think that would be really helpful for people that are struggling with depression and not having luck with maybe traditional therapy, medication.
Yeah, absolutely. I've networked recently with a very experienced therapist who specializes in trauma, and she told me that she thinks the sort of holy grail, holy trinity for treating developmental trauma is EMDR, IFS parts work, a little bit of somatic therapy to bring it together, and then ketamine therapy to sort of like rewire the nervous system after you've done all the internal work. And I think there's some real wisdom in that. I mean, she is really a leader in the field, but I think that combination is important. And I say that because I see a lot of people go into ketamine therapy without those other pieces. I have done so much therapy in my life, right? I just told you since I was 15 years old, I've been doing a lot of therapy, a lot of different modalities of therapy, somatic forms of therapy. I'm a body worker, I'm an acupuncturist. I know my stuff, right? I'm very familiar with my inner landscape. And I really think that contributed to how successful we could say my experience was, how profound my experience was. I also want to note, so I had this incredible experience, and these two practitioners were just starting out. So they're very fresh. They had a lot of energy, and I was really spoiled. So we ended up doing about a 4 or 5 hour session with both practitioners present in the room with me the entire time. And I was very anxious, right? Like I said, I was not a drug person. I was really nervous about being high in this capacity. And so they said, you know what? We're going to start you with a low dose. Ketamine is administered in a few different ways for those who aren't familiar. Right now, you can get, like from Mind Bloom, that company online, you get lozenges that you dissolve in your mouth. That's what you do if you do it at home. Some therapists you'll see in the office will give you a powder that you hold in your mouth and then spit out. So both of those are sublingual, basically, right? You're absorbing it through the tissues in your mouth. When people take ketamine recreationally, they usually snort it through their nose. You can only get so much into your bloodstream that way. And so you're often not having the kind of experience that people have in a therapeutic setting where you can really get it into your tissues this way. The administration I had was intramuscular, which means injections. They injected it into my arm. And I just think this is the best. I'm biased for no good reason because I haven't used the lozenges. I haven't even snorted it. I've only taken it in my veins. I loved it, and when I compare my experience to people who use the other modes of admission, it seems like I had a really different experience. It seems like I had a very, very different experience. And so I was so nervous. They said, listen, we're going to start you in a low dose. Anyone who does this will do a proper intake with a physician. Physicians are the people who can administer ketamine, and they will assess your full health history, any past drug use, your sensitivity to chemicals, and figure out the right dose. So they said, we're going to do a light dose. We're just going to do, I think it was 35 milligrams intramuscularly. That's a very low dose. So they gave me that dose, and again, I got their full attention. We did a full intention setting ceremony before this. We drew a tarot card. They didn't know much about my psychological history, and so we were going into that more blind. But like again, that with the three of us, we're really focused on my experience here. So it starts to hit, and they told me the whole time, as soon as it started to hit, I started muttering self and other, which was a focus of mine in my therapeutic journey. It's like, where's the boundary between self and other? Where do I end? How do I interact with people outside of my own consciousness? And then I proceeded to do like 45 minutes of the best psychotherapy I've maybe ever had. It was incredible. And part of it is that she was a very good therapist, and she was really following my lead. Whatever I was talking about, the self and other was our first prompt, and eliciting content and processing and insight from me that just went so much farther and deeper than you can normally go in an unassisted psychotherapy session. It was just like, the insights were coming so fast, one after the other. And, I'd say something. She's like, wow, it sounds like you're ready to let go of that limiting belief. And then we would do some sort of ceremony to release the limiting belief. They would use eagle feathers to brush me off and like clear the belief away. It was so beautiful. It was really profound. I was having a great time. I was definitely in an altered state, but I was still pretty conscious, right? And the physician who administered the ketamine has done a lot of ketamine, and he said, Ketamina, that's what he calls her, Ketamina always comes to me during my trips. She always speaks to me, and she'll probably come speak to you. I was so good at the 35. I was like, we had talked about doing a higher dose to get me to what would be considered a full therapeutic dose. And I was like, guys, this is great. Let's just keep talking. We're having such a nice conversation. And then I saw this huge creature. She looked like a leaf full of holes that was a giant wing. And she was against a background of like a starry night. And she bent over and said to me, I know you want to stay here, but there's somewhere I want to take you. And when ketamine speaks, you say yes, right? And so I said, okay, let's do the bigger dose. And this time I was really nervous because, I'm already altered. What else could happen? And they gave me a much bigger booster at this point. I think they gave me another 60 or 70 milligrams. So I was over 100 milligrams at this point. At that point, I went into what people call the K hole. They had a nice bed made up for me. They were playing music that was very intentionally curated for this experience. And I just sort of closed my eyes. And what I remember from this part of the journey is that my hands, when you're kids and you fold paper into sort of accordions that can fold down and then fold up. My hands, every time I moved them, these accordions would come out of them. And I just started building my reality. I started by building a room and then a house. I was making furniture, I was making buildings, and I was just having this whole experience processing the ways that we create our reality. The ways that our beliefs, our abilities, our desires are sort of this lens through which we create the existence that we experience. Then it started to just get weirder and weirder. It's kind of hard to talk about in concrete terms, but I really felt like I experienced God, supreme consciousness, the oneness of all being. I was just in this beautiful, peaceful place. It was like I was beyond time. I was resting in this state of pure consciousness where everything was okay because nothing ever really ended. Nothing was really separate. It was just that oneness, which is a moment of spiritual enlightenment that spiritual teachers reference. I wasn't experiencing it as, wow, here I am enlightened. I just experienced this as this profound sense of peace. Everything was okay. And stayed there for a while. And that was lovely. And there was probably a lot more I experienced there that I don't remember or can't communicate. And then I started to come down. And I was coming down and sort of coming out of it. And I don't remember how we got there, but I'm sitting up now. We're kind of going back into therapy, talking mode. And this was very visual, which is interesting because I don't really get visuals. I've done a lot of other substances at this point in my life, and I don't get the crazy psychedelic visuals on mushrooms or acid that some people get. But ketamine was very visual for me. And I was sitting on my mother's grave, and I was a baby in a basket. And there was a giant German Shepherd dog next to me, and the whole cemetery was on fire around us. And this is what I mean when I say, like, they said it wouldn't bring up trauma, but like this was, my deepest wound was being alone. Ugh. Yeah, it really got like right to the big stuff, which is such a gift. Like it got right to the core thing that I sit with and haven't really been able to process. I don't know. It's almost like that material wasn't fully available to me until I used this substance to get my ego way out of the way. And then there it was. And so then again, we started doing some therapy. And I will say this was less effective, I think. The physician who was doing the session is really into IFS parts work, which I just mentioned is great for trauma. And he tried to do parts work with like the dog being like the protector, guardian part of me, and the baby being this exile part of me. And honestly, after 4 hours on ketamine, I was not ready to do parts work. Like I had so much to process. I was not in like a super conscious state, but I still think there was something very healing about just witnessing and having two other professionals witness this inner part of me that was so, so young and so wounded. And so then we just kind of wound down and my friend picked me up. And before I left, I did ask them. I was out of it enough that I could have, a coherent conversation. And I asked them two questions. One, I liked the answer, the other, I didn't. I asked them, how should I integrate this? And they didn't give me great answer. They said, take care of your body, eat and drink good things, maybe avoid alcohol and sugar, have more vegetables, more green juice, rest a lot, journal a lot. I think that's all fine, but with what is now some pretty considerable experience with using substances in a therapeutic setting, I think integration, it's a hot topic right now in the community. And I think a more structured integration really benefits the participant. So if you're going to start a process like that with a therapist, keep going. Go back to that therapist for 3 months, for 6 months. Keep revisiting that content. Keep sort of like closing the loop of whatever was opened in that experience. I think a lot of people rely on ketamine purely for the chemical reset. And I understand there is a therapeutic value there, right? I was very disappointed. I had such a great experience. I referred so many patients to these people. And I found out about a year and a half later, they had so much business. They figured out they had to start streamlining the process. And so they would give injections and then give the participant an eye pillow, a set of headphones with a playlist on it, and leave them alone for 4 hours. And just, you get that chemical reset. The ketamine is in your bloodstream. It is rewiring your neural pathways. You're getting this sort of peaceful homeostasis experience. I do not think that is anywhere close to the therapeutic experience I had that I just described to you. And I'm very sad the patients I referred didn't get that. And now I'm really looking for practitioners who do more engaged work. And there's a split opinion in the community. A lot of people say you create the container and just let the medicine do the work. Just let that person go into their psyche and you hold that container safety, let the medicine do the work. I don't know. I had such an amazing experience. I want to be able to refer others to the kind of experience I had. And when you do that, I think part of the integration work is having someone who's with you in those moments, be able to revisit them with you and bring even more consciousness to whatever content arises in those moments. The other thing I asked them was, who should I refer to you? Who do you think is really ripe for this experience? And this time I did like their answer. They said, the person who's been doing their work, they've been going to therapy, they've been doing their inner work, they know what the map of their issues is, but they're stuck on a track. They're circling. There I am choosing men who remind me of my abusive father. Yep, I'm doing it again. Oh shit, I did it again. And they were like, for those people who are stuck in that rut, ketamine can kick them into a new groove in their brain so that they can start making new choices. They can start seeing things from a truly different perspective. I think that was a phenomenal answer. And I think that is the person who's really ripe for this kind of experience. Someone who's done their work, has some deep self-knowledge, has the capacity to witness self and also to grow. Like they've done enough work that they've established safety within their nervous system. They've established a sense of self and a relationship with self that's healthy enough that it can really hold this experience. I say that because, again, it's so trendy here in San Francisco, and I see so many people opting into these experiences without that foundation and without the foundation of a practitioner who's really an ally on this journey. And I think they have sort of a peak experience in the moment, but I don't think that peak experience leads to real growth. I think they come out of that and they kind of just are the same person they were beforehand, just they've had a peak experience. My prayer for so many of the people I work with who want to have this experience is they can have the really present depth work experience that I had, if that's what they're ready for, if that's what their spirit and their nervous system is ready to call in.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's so helpful for people that are considering this. I think that's really, really good to know. And I think just how that clinic shifted their practice probably just illustrates the level of need that there is. It sounds like they got very overwhelmed, very busy, and couldn't keep up didn't have the capacity to keep up with the demand. So I know, as I said before, I know a lot of therapists are starting to get trained in this. So hopefully there will be more experiences like you experienced and integrating that therapeutic aspect of the ketamine therapy. Yeah, I think there's just such a great need right now that probably a lot of practitioners aren't able to meet the demand.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And there are a lot more people doing it. I do think part of the therapeutic or structural shift, though, is this idea of you just let the medicine do the work. I will say I've known friends who've done ketamine to treat depression with very mixed results. It's been interesting to compare our experiences. I had one friend who went to see the same two people after they'd sort of changed their business model. She experienced nothing. She didn't even feel a little bit high. It was just blackness for 4 hours. She was kind of bored, nothing. I have a friend who has been treating pretty severe chronic depression, lifetime chronic depression, and has done so much ketamine. And it helps a little, but it doesn't necessarily give her major breakthroughs. She doesn't necessarily feel like she's really turned a page. And then I have another friend who did the mind bloom thing. She had a lot of depression going in. I think it was more of sort of like a thought experiment. And I think it was fun for her, but not profound for her. And so, everyone responds really differently. And especially in this age, ketamine is the first FDA approved substance, which is wonderful. In the Bay Area, I know that ketamine, psilocybin, and MDMA are all substances that therapists use, above or underground. And they each have their own impact. They affect a person differently. And so finding a therapist who can help you assess really which path is right for you, I think is a very important part of the process. A therapist who's educated about the different chemicals and which is best for who and when. It's really useful.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's really helpful that you are sharing your experience too, because I think that's great feedback for practitioners, for therapists, that this is what I found to be really helpful and such a profound experience. I think that's helpful feedback for people to hear that are considering it, that maybe they will look for something like that. And just to keep in mind, right, we are all different. All of our bodies are different. We're all going to react to different treatments, different modalities in different ways, right? And not just substances like that, but even just different modalities like talk therapy versus EMDR versus IFS, right? And I think that was helpful
Mhm.
too before that you mentioned kind of that idea of the holy grail, right? Just because I don't think that doing one thing, no matter what that one thing is
Yes,
helpful.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
So walk us through, you leave, then what happens in the next few weeks, the next few months? So you said you saw a friend that noticed the big difference, but you didn't feel like you were noticing a big difference. What did you do to integrate the experience? How did that look for you?
The first couple weeks, I felt sort of an afterglow. That's the term people use. And I definitely felt that for maybe 2 weeks. That sense of lightness was very acute for 2 weeks. And there was this sense of hopefulness, that feeling of oneness that was so beautiful. I remembered it. I remembered it somatically. I could almost go back to that. And that really shifted something in me. That really opened something in me. And then again, after about 2 weeks, it just sort of faded. It was just a thing I did a couple weeks ago. I didn't feel that afterglow. I wasn't thinking back to those moments that were really profound for me in the same way. I had done some journaling. I'd probably done some therapy because I do a lot of therapy. So I bet I did. I wish I would have done more somatic work. I'm biased, obviously, as an acupuncturist, but I think there is a real integration that can happen when you get your body involved. I think I might have got a massage, which is useful also. Yeah, and then I didn't see that friend for about 6 months, and it's not like I would say after 2 weeks I was like, oh no, I feel depressed again. I guess that didn't do anything. I just wasn't feeling the afterglow acutely. I think it's hard to monitor subtle shifts in yourself. I see this with my patients who come in for pain that's at like, an 8 out of 10. And then after a few treatments, their pain is gone and they've forgotten how severe it was. They've forgotten that when they saw me, they thought they'd have to see a surgeon because their pain was so intense and nothing helped with it. And I think that's true in mental health too. As things get better, you forget exactly how dark and hard it was. And so, yeah, I just lived my life and wasn't necessarily thinking about, am I as depressed as I used to be? Until that friend reflected back to me. And then again, I was like, oh, I think something really must have shifted. If this person who hasn't seen me in years has this, palpable change that she can reflect back to me, something must have really shifted.
That must have been great to hear. I would imagine that felt validating for the whole experience.
It really did. It really, really did. And I've always been sort of sad that I'm depressed, which feels like a circuitous statement, but it's the best way I can describe it. The part of me that's observing me is bummed out that I'm bummed out. Like, here we are again. Why can't I get out of this rut? Why am I Eeyore? Why am I Debbie Downer all the time? I don't want to be blue. I don't want to be, the sad one in the group. And so, yeah, so exciting to think maybe I don't have to be that person. Maybe there is a way to sort of change this thing that I thought was so foundational and fundamental, essential to who I am in the world. And it's interesting. That experience was so profound for me. And again, kind of shook my world, right? Like I hadn't done a lot of substances before that. So this was a really big deal for me. I remember walking out of the session and being like, I don't need to do that for another year. And I know it is common now in ketamine treatment plans to do ketamine like weekly for maybe 6 or 8 weeks or more. You can do a lot of ketamine, basically. Again, that's right for some people. Talk to your doctor, figure out what is the best fit for you. For me, I came out of there and I thought, I will be processing this on many layers of my being for a year. I knew that. I need to take a year off from anything. I see that people who treat these experiences as like really sacred and do a lot of work leading up to them and commit to a long period of integrating them, having the most, well, I'm overusing the word, but really the most profound experiences. And I have a spiritual teacher who feels very strongly that people should prepare for a few full year before going down that rabbit hole. I think you get out what you put in. I will say that the people who did my journey, the therapist and the physician at the end, it was very flattering. They were like, we've never seen a trip like yours. And they said, it is very obvious that you've done a lot of inner work. It's almost like you've been blowing up the balloon and it was ready to pop because you've spent so much of your life force preparing for this. It's like setting the stage for this. And I think that's really true. I think the more you read the books, you do the therapy, you do the breath work, like the more you get to know yourself, the more potential that the chemicals have to work with.
I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, are you at all considering doing it again?
I've thought about it. I've thought about it in moments where I'm feeling super depressed again. My father passed the last year from pancreatic cancer, which was very difficult. And I went through a major breakup right after that. And that was a really hard period. It was a period of about 6 months that was really difficult. And I thought about reaching for ketamine at several points during that period. I think cost was the biggest barrier. It is very expensive. And I think if I could have found a more affordable way to do it, I probably would have opted into it. Yeah, I absolutely think I would have reached for that. I am very tapped into the psychedelic community here now, and so I ended up having a psilocybin journey with a friend. That was exactly what I needed, and I mean, not dissimilar, honestly, as far as like dredging up some content that was really needing to go to help me process a lot of the grief I was experiencing. So the answer is no, but I absolutely would. And I also wish it were less expensive.
Okay, no, that's great to know that there is a cost barrier. So, do you know of, is it covered by insurance at all, or is it all out of pocket?
I think it is covered by insurance. That's a great question. I'm not sure which plans cover it, but again, it is FDA approved for the treatment of depression. It is something that a doctor can prescribe. So there must be some insurance plan that covers that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure. So, anybody out there who's listening that is interested in that, definitely contact your insurance. Courtney, this was amazing and so helpful to hear about your experience and just hear about ketamine assisted therapy. Like you said, really helpful for some people and definitely worth considering for those that have been struggling with depression, have tried all the things and just not seeing the progress that they would like. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice or anything that you would like those to know that are considering it?
Well, there are a lot of ways you can have this experience. You can order the Mind Bloom lozenges and just do it at home on your own. And I think when you do that, you have to check in with a therapist online between sessions. That's one option that might be great for some people, some personalities. You can have a physician give you injections, or I think they even do IV, but there's no therapeutic component to it, right? It's just here's the chemical, let's see how you respond. Another potentially great option. And then there are a lot of ways you can work with therapists who work with physicians so that the physician is supplying the substance, but the therapist is really running the session, the experience. That's another way to do it. Like we just said, everyone is different. You have to figure out what's right for you. I know for me, having that therapeutic guide made a really big difference. I did it with a therapist I didn't know very well, but for a lot of people, I can imagine that establishing a really solid relationship with a therapist might be something that makes this experience feel safer and allows you to go deeper into wherever it wants to take you. So I would just really consider your options and what the right one is for you based on where you are in your journey, how sensitive you are, what kind of personality you have, what your budget is. All of this will play into it. But just know there's a lot of options and pick the one that's right for you.
That is great to know. Courtney, I would love if you could share where everyone can find you. And then if you're up for a few speed questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. For anyone who wants to, check out my practice, it's CourtneyMooreWellness.com. I do acupuncture in the Bay Area and I do remote energy readings for people all over the country. And that can also be a really great way to prepare for or integrate a psychedelic experience. So I'm absolutely available if anyone wants some support that way.
Oh, great. I didn't know that you did that virtually.
Yeah,
Okay, amazing. I will put all of those links in the show notes. And are you ready for a few speed round questions?
go for it.
All right, great. Number one, what is your go-to self-care practice?
I have a very strong yoga practice 4 times a week. It means a lot to me, and it is what keeps me sane.
Amazing. Okay.
Mm.
Number two, what would you say your spirit animal is?
Some kind of cat, probably a big cat.
I did notice the cat tree in the background.
Yeah.
I'm a big cat person, so I love that. All
Yeah.
right. Last one. Do you have any podcasts that you're listening to right now or one that you would recommend to our listeners?
So I went through this really difficult period last year. My father died. I ended a relationship. It ended very horribly. And I was doing a lot of my own work around men at that time. And I got really into the Man Talks podcast. And I got so into it. It is still my favorite podcast. I listen to it every week, more if Connor puts out more episodes. I don't know exactly why, but I think it really gave me faith in men and the masculine and the rising consciousness of masculinity. I also think Connor is a phenomenal interviewer and brings on really interesting guests who cover really interesting topics. So I'm going to put my vote in for the Man Talk Show.
Awesome. I haven't heard of it. I will definitely check that out and I will link that in the show notes. Courtney, thank you so much for being here and thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think this is going to be so helpful to a lot of people that have been struggling.
It was a pleasure, and I really hope that's true. For anyone struggling, just remember there are so many resources out there. Keep going, keep trying. You're going to find the thing. I know it.